Well, welcome to our first of what is going to be a real exciting series talking about the Illinois Tomb, Illinois Caves with Harry Hubbard. If you've never heard of Harry Hubbard, you're not alone. A lot of people haven't. Let me tell you about this man, and we're going to discuss what he's discovered. It's over a lot of people's heads simply because they don't want to believe that there's a possibility that ancient civilizations actually lived and had been in North America, where history books tell us is that that's not true. There's no way. Harry Hubbard is a very unique man, and I'm very happy to have gotten to know him a little bit. And over this series, I'm sure I'm going to know him a whole lot more. But in my conversations with him, I just knew that we had to do this series, and he agreed to. He's kind of been laying back for past 10 to 15 years when it comes to his discoveries of what he found in southern Illinois. But let me tell you, this is a man who is an ancient map collector. I consider him truly an historian, no doubt an explorer. And probably one of his best parts is that he's an avid book collector, finding, the old books, old history, along with those ancient maps, of course. And, it's hard to find people who read these days, but Harry is like, I've been all my life. I would rather see a book than go look up something on the internet, especially now. So I appreciate his avid desire to constantly read, because that's the same way I am. So I guess that's something we have great in common. He, in my book, is the expert regarding the Southern Illinois tomb. Of what he has been able to show on his site, IllinoisCaves.com, is really, through the artifacts, shows that it is the tomb of Alexander the Great. Go to IllinoisCaves.com, and we're going to make some mentions during our show today. Both Harry and I have different pages on there, but just start off there. Harry has posted videos that he's made in the past. They're all on there as well. You can see the link right there on the home page, IllinoisCaves.com. Just click videos, or you can go click where it says videos, now available online, free of charge. Take your time, go through them. I mean, take your time, because you're going to get an education that the history books, the modern ones, do not want to tell you. And that education will be based on reality of artifacts, of things that are written in older books, of maps that prove what our modern maps seem to miss. So this is going to be a real interesting series, without a doubt. Harry is also an author. He's already got one book done that he's kind of revamping. He's working on the second book about all the experiences with the Illinois tomb of Alexander the Great. And there's a lot there. I've read them both. I've had that privilege, so I've gotten a great sneak peek at some really wonderful, intriguing, and pretty much puts your mouth open kind of information. I don't know what else to say more about it. Harry's got a lot to say. So, Harry, there's an introduction for you. That go all right?
I just wish you'd keep going. I mean, you sound so good. Keep on. But thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to doing this series. I don't know how many episodes it's going to take, but we'll cover everything you want to cover.
Well, Harry, if we just did your first book, we'd probably be half a year. So I guess since you got two books, it just might end up being a year here on Sunday afternoons. Who knows?
Okay, I've got it scripted down, and we'll see how it goes.
Well, this seems pretty far-fetched. I'm sure to anybody who's going to listen to this series of, you got to be kidding me. The tomb of Alexander the Great sitting in southern Illinois. But, there's a lot behind it. It might seem like that's a crazy statement to make, but I'll guarantee any listener, by the time you're done with this series, Harry, they're going to be there with their mouth open, and when they see the pictures, they see the transcriptions of the tablets that you have on your site, IllinoisCaves.com, go in there to the images, People, it's there for you to see with your own eyes. It's there for you to read. In the videos, you'll have the translations that Harry and his associate Paul Shafranki have done. It's just some amazing stuff. So let's start at the beginning, Harry. There is a place called Hickory Hill, Illinois.
Yes.
Why don't you start from there, and what was found outside of Hickory Hill, Illinois?
Well, if I hadn't been a part of this story, I would probably be the most skeptical of anyone to say that Alexander the Great is buried in Illinois. It's so far-fetched. It's so far out in left field. And there is a tremendous learning curve in not just history, but ancient languages, the artifacts and the politically incorrect artifacts, the stones that the artifacts are carved on. There are so many things that one has to take into consideration before or after they begin to learn what has happened here. Mm-hmm. And I had purchased several books from the early 1990s. I believe one of them was from David Hatcher Childress, that mentioned Burroughs Cave, a fantastic discovery, if it is real. And I had always believed that the ancient Mediterranean/Europeans had come here. I didn't have any basis for it, but I stood on my soapbox and I preached it. My father took me to ancient sites and mounds when I was a child, and I just enjoyed seeing them and seeing these ancient artifacts and these ancient carvings that were just incredible. So I always believed that the ancients from Rome, North Africa, Europe, had come here. And in the books, many of the antiquities books printed in the 1800s, they discuss all kinds of incredible finds, ancient coins, ancient walls, fortifications, palisades, ramparts, various things of that nature all over this country. So reading, and finally I purchased, I believe it was from David Hatcher Childress, the Mystery Cave of Many Faces book. And that led to my friend Paul breaking the decipherments in the books. After the Mystery Cave of Many Faces book, I believe it was Dr. Joe Mahan who sent us a copy of Jim Shears's book, Rock Art Pieces from Burroughs Cave, that also had over 100 pictures of artifacts in it. And then Paul had enough to go on, and he essentially cracked this ancient form of Latin, a vernacular form of Latin, using Mediterranean characters. You may have Phoenician characters, a morphed Greek character, or a basic Latin character, and they were all intermeshed. And you may have, for instance, a Greek god's name in Latin characters, and vice versa. It's just a mishmash, but it was all vernacular, and they wrote as they spoke. So Paul was able to phonetically make the decipherments, and then the whole story started to fall into place.
Well, let's start it with where I mentioned Hickory Hill. That has to do with what you just spoke about. That really is just outside of Hickory Hill, I believe, which doesn't exist anymore. I think you've told me that.
Ghost town today, yes.
Okay, well, there was a family there that was cleaning out an area in the woods, and why don't you go ahead and give that story with the Lowry family, and
okay.
They, in my book, are the true discoverers of what Tomb is all about.
And I might want to point out before I tell this story, or this story after story, that I learned all of this long after I became involved. I began to pick up on it in winter of 1995, and by summer of 1995, I had actually spoken to one of Orville Lowry's daughters who gave me the entire story. So in winter of 1995, I was introduced to a lady who in turn introduced me to another gentleman who had known about Russell Burroughs and this Burroughs Cave for many, many years. And then the story began to take place. Russell Burroughs at the time lived in Olney, Illinois, and we couldn't figure out what drew him down to Marion County? How did he get here? How do you just
all of a sudden appear?
Make a discovery from so far away? What are you doing there? He told people he was hunting or hunting caves or a Civil War homestead, which none of that was true. There was nothing like that here. So what I was to learn is that there had been a treasure book printed in 1977. And the treasure book is called A Guide to Treasure in Illinois and Indiana. And it's by Michael Paul Henson, a premier treasure book writer. And I might want to add that he was editor and publisher of Lost Treasure magazine for, I believe, about 20 years before he passed away in the early 1990s. And on page 20 of this book, there's a caption, and under Marion County. There's several Marion County captions, but this one says, about 10 miles east of Kells on Orville Lowry's farm, a large rock bluff runs in a north-south direction. About 1925, Orville found a hole in the solid rock of this bluff. A rock lid carved exactly to fit the hole left only a faint line to show where it was. Orville removed the lid and discovered an empty cavity. There are numerous carvings below the hole that are believed to be Indian or Spanish. No other cavities have been found, but anyone deciphering these symbols or using a metal detector along the face of this bluff might come upon something exciting there. Lowry firmly believed that the cavity had been filled with gold nuggets because he saw traces of gold on the sides of the hole. End of caption. Books like this were given away free upon the purchase of a metal detector. In the late 70s, early 80s, when metal detectors started to become more popular, there was a need to sell them as well as provide people with places to go to use them. Perhaps they would find something. So this book was pretty much a freebie given to people who purchased a metal detector. And Michael Paul Henson had found that story while he was at the Salem Courthouse in Marion County in the early 60s. And he was fascinated with that particular write-up. It was listed in, I believe they called it Property Histories, recorded by the WAPA writer in the 1930s. You remember they had the CCC Corps or Civil Servants Corps. They had WAPA. And in each township, there was a person paid to collect historical data from each township. And this is one of the stories that was recorded in the WAPA papers, which I cannot find anywhere, and there's no one in the courthouse anymore that knows how to look these things up.
Oh, I'm sure it's in an attic or a basement or in a warehouse somewhere with all the other old records.
There are people that know how to hunt things in a courthouse, but most of us don't. And that's a gifted art. And now at the Marion County Courthouse, there is no one there that knows how to hunt for data.
Well, now everything's computerized, Harry.
Yes, and if it's not on a poster on the wall, it's hard to find.
Well,
However,
this is when he researched this in 1960, and he said this dated back to 1925 with the Lowry family.
Yeah, with Orville Lowry. Well, while Michael Paul Henson was in town, he looked up Orville Lowry, evidently in the phone books, and found that he was living in Mount Vernon, Illinois. So he set up an appointment to see Orville Lowry, and Orville Lowry was very happy to meet this man, who was a treasure book writer. For years, Orville Lowry tried to get the state of Illinois interested in his site, but they kind of brushed him off the side, saying, "No, there's nothing there. There's nothing there. Indians are not vogue at that time. Ancient civilizations were not vogue at that time." So they just brushed him off. And he was content to get his inscription entered into the WAPA papers as a record, and somehow Michael Paul Henson found that. But evidently, from what I understand, which I will discuss later, Michael Paul Henson had a knack for this. He traveled from county to county in different states, and he knew how to go to the courthouse and look up the WAPA, research the WAPA papers, and find ghost towns, things of this nature.
He knew what to look for.
He knew what to look for, and most treasure books, even today, use Michael Paul Henson's letters, memos, writings, captions in their books, and guides and atlases. So getting back to Orville Lowry, Michael Paul Henson met with Orville Lowry, and Orville Lowry was delighted to take him, actually, to the site where he had found this. And Michael Paul Henson went there and witnessed it with his own eyes. And this was a very important caption to Michael Paul Henson. He wanted something done with it. Now, he wasn't himself able to stay in one place for a particularly long period of time or make his own investigations. He was the writer. He was the researcher, the investigator. So he continued on from town to town. Okay, this was recorded in 1961. Now, we jump back up to the 70s, in late 70s. This particular book, Treasure Guide to Indiana and Illinois, was published in 1977. Now, Michael Paul Henson was friends with many other treasure book writers, and one that any metal detectorist or treasure hunter will be absolutely familiar with is Thomas P. Terry, Terry, who was the author of United States Treasure Atlas, which is a series of volumes, 3/8 of an inch thick, half an inch thick, with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of listings for ghost towns, lost churches, lost schools, treasure guides, treasure listings, on and on and on.
So this is where Hickory Hill, Illinois comes in.
Yes, and in part, but like I say, Thomas Terry and Michael Paul Henson were good friends. And when Thomas P. Terry was putting his treasure atlas together, Michael Paul Henson thought that there were several captions that he had listed in years past that needed to go in these United States treasure atlases. Places he'd been to himself, places he thought were important, they needed to be recorded further. And there are not too many of the captions listed by Michael Paul Henson that Thomas Terry reprinted. But under Illinois, listing number 686 reads this: treasure is believed buried on the old Orville Lowry farms about 2 miles southwest of Helm. Numerous carvings of Indian or Spanish origin were found in 1925 and can still be seen. Now, in Thomas Terry's atlases, he has maps with the numbers on them. And right there, big as day, there's a little circle with 686 right on top of where this site is, Hickory Hill. Hickory Hill was the town about 2.5 miles southwest of Helm. So upon the purchase of this book and upon purchase of a metal detector with the other book, anyone can crisscross these coordinates and arrive pretty close to the same place. And Thomas Terry, when I had spoken to him, he had explained to me that it was listed from Helm because Michael Paul Henson wanted to make sure that there were no copyright infringements between his publisher and Thomas P. Terry's publisher. So that's why the caption is from two different directions. At the bidding of Michael Paul Henson.
And I believe you told me one goes from east to west, the other goes from west to east, so they're coordinating the same spot, just said a different way.
Right, exactly. And you could have had a listing from the south, a listing from the north. So this is how this particular site ends up in two very, very popular treasure books. And that led to its rediscovery in 1982.
Well, I don't want to talk about Burroughs yet. There'll be a lot for him.
Okay, then let's take it back to summer of 95.
Yeah, summer '95. You spoke with the daughter of Orville Lowry. So,
Yes, correct.
Tell us about that.
I first of all got in touch with one of the local historians, a lady named Dixie, and she had grown up with Orville Lowry's daughters, and she provided me with a phone number to contact Fern Lowry, who was then living in Fort Worth, Texas. And when I first met Ms. Lowry, she was 76 years old. And she remembered finding this hole when she was 6 years old as if it had happened the day before. It had burned its way into her memory, and let me bring up that story. She explained to me that she, her little sister, and her father were clearing off some ground between the ravines to make what they call a truck patch, which means you're going to grow enough vegetables to fill up the back of an old pickup truck. Now, bear in mind, pickup truck beds were much smaller in the 30s. And so they were charged with picking up these rocks, and most of the rocks they were picking up and throwing into the back of the truck were Indian artifacts, axe heads, arrowheads, implements, tools, celts, grinding stones, et cetera, et cetera.
Wow, wouldn't that be different? Wouldn't that be different today if somebody was out there throwing them in the back of the pickup?
Would. And so she said she'd wandered off from her father and her sister, and that she was actually the one who discovered the lid with the hole underneath it. And she called her father over. Her father moved the lid, and all three of them saw this hole that went down into the ground.
Well, you're saying a hole. What kind of hole?
A hole probably about 18 inches, 20 inches that went straight down into the sandstone.
Okay, was this cut out? Was this something that eroded away from water erosion from an old creek bed? What kind of?
No, it was on top of the bluff, and when Russell Burroughs got there, one of the first things he did was he took the lid. The lid, as I saw, Thelma McLean owned the lid, and it actually had a bevel underneath it where you could see where it fit tightly over something. It was rounded. The edges of it were rounded, had a curve to it, where it would have sat in place quite steadfastly over a carved hole. So
this is a carved hole in the rock?
Yes, just big enough for a man
shaft
to get his shoulders down into, yes.
And I don't remember reading any of this, so it's kind of news to me. You come out with stuff all the time, Harry, when we talk. So, who owned the lid? You mean that Russell Burroughs, when he started pilfering everything out of this tomb, somebody actually owned the lid that was discovered back in the 20s?
Yes, he sold the lid to an antique dealer in Olney.
Oh my gosh. I wonder where that is now.
At that time, he started using a board, covering up with dirt. Gosh, who knows?
I wonder where that is now. The lid alone.
The lid got sold, I believe, at an auction.
So that could be anywhere in the world.
It could be anywhere in the world, yes.
Wow.
It had a real nice, pretty design on it. I've got pictures of it somewhere.
Speaking of pictures, I want to remind everybody to get on your site that you've got up there, IllinoisCaves.com, and go to the section. When you go on the main page, you can go into the images. But for those of you who can't make it on there right now, it's IllinoisCaves.com/images.htm. Everything that Harry's going to talk about in this entire series, you can follow it pretty well with things that he has on his site already. So, Harry, here we've got this great discovery that's written about in the 60s, comes out in books, and in the 70s, and the original discovery is back in 1925. Historical records of what brought about it being published in the 60s and 70s in these two treasure hunter books, so to speak, in the lost town of Hickory Hill. And we go from that point, as you said, you've pieced all this together kind of backwards. You started in 94, 95 with this and learned as you went along what happened before you ever got interested. So You've done a pretty good job of putting one heck of a puzzle together here, Harry.
Well, thank you. I guess I'm a historical investigator.
Well, that's why I said you are an historian. My intro to you was no exaggeration. If anybody looks at least two of your videos with some of your ancient maps that you've collected over quite a long time, 3 decades?
I can't remember. It's been a long time.
Yeah, probably more than 3 decades from what I'm getting out of what you've written about your experiences. And as people will find out later on, probably quite a few shows from now, you actually can be considered an explorer, Harry, because you did some digging.
Yeah, I've done my share of digging.
Well, we're just going to take a quick break here for about a minute and a half, almost 2 minutes. And when I get back with Harry, we're going to get into what happened in the 1980s with this name that he mentioned, Russell Burroughs, and basically how the caves were pilfered and the artifacts, so many of them were taken out, and a lot have been lost. A lot are in private collectors' hands. Harry has pictures of an awful lot of them. Go to IllinoisCaves.com. Go click on there about the images. You'll freak out because you're going to get a real history lesson with this series, something that, most of us have never, ever heard of anything that sounds as bizarre as this, but with so much proof behind it. And it's all sitting right there. Go look for yourself. So we'll be back here in under 2 minutes, and stay with us because you're going to find out about what some of these artifacts are and some more things. The man who pilfered most of the cave, Russell Burroughs, who sadly many people refer to these caves, which are actually a tomb, as Burrough Cave. So hang in there. We'll be right back.
Informed, enlightened, alive and amplified. This is the Living Light Network.
Well, you're back with Michael Edward. I'm hosting this series on the Illinois Caves, Lost Tomb of Alexander the Great. Sounds pretty wild, doesn't it? The Lost Tomb of Alexander the Great sitting in southern Illinois in Marion County. It sounds almost unbelievable, and I would say that 99.9% would say it's unbelievable. And you know what? I was one of those until I was put on to the information that Harry's got. I've watched his videos. My guest, Harry Hubbard, he did videos in 1995, most of them. Some are a little bit later than that, but in the 90s, he's got his videos sitting up there on the site. He teaches you what some of these tablets say that came out of these caves. There's a reason he says this is the lost tomb of Alexander the Great, because the writing says so. Now, there's something that's really hard to ignore. But the sad part is what Harry was just discussing in the first half hour. There comes the sad part in my book, and that's talking about Russell Burroughs, which this cave or these caves have been inappropriately nicknamed the Burroughs Caves after the man who pilfered so much out of there and most likely dynamited any kind of entrance, the one that he was using, the one that Harry just spoke about, discovered in 1925, most likely dynamited it to make sure that nobody could ever easily find the caves again. And you know, Harry, this is the tough part that I have a hard time with, is because of that pilfering, that statement that this is the lost tomb of Alexander the Great. There is so much more in there, and yet from what few things came out from the picture records that you have of people like who I can't remember her name, Horrigan.
Yes.
Okay, you've got this proof. You've got pictures, if not actual artifacts yourself. Burroughs turned around and took artifacts he was pilfering out of this tomb, because he's the one to even describe it as a tomb. I believe you wrote in your first book that there was 15 or 17 crypts.
Yes, and let me be clear that the lost tomb of Alexander the Great actually includes the entire Ptolemaic Thema, the family mausoleum, and all of the cadavers in it. This is not only the lost tomb of Alexander the Great, which is the main crypt, the featured corpse. It is also containing the entire Ptolemaic king line down to the last Ptolemy, which was Cleopatra VII, Queen Cleopatra.
Is that the same Cleopatra who had her thing with Mark Antony?
Yes.
Really?
And we have been saying, this is important also, we have been saying that this is the lost tomb of Alexander the Great for over 16 years. And no one, the world over, has come up with anything to say that it is not. Every now and then, about every other year, every 3 years or so, somebody will say, oh, they found Queen Cleopatra's grave, or they found Alexander the Great. Or there have been several finds of this is Alexander the Great since we started this. And it hits the news one day, and there is nothing after that. Nothing. Wow. Because they don't have it. Their data is inconclusive, or there's no historical evidence of that or this. And it was coincidentally, or not, one of the missing sons of Cleopatra and Mark Antony who brought all of this over to North America.
Now, you're talking about something the history books, the modern ones, are not telling us, that what you're stating is what a lot of other people have said as well, and what more discoveries are actually proving, not just yours, especially down in the southern end of the Mississippi. Some of the mounds, some of the inscriptions there are really backing up what you have found in the Illinois caves, but you're one of those who's being joined by many others who are beginning to prove to people that modern history isn't telling the truth, that back when we have all these stories of everything that happened in the Mediterranean, especially with Egypt and Mark Antony and the Roman Empire and all these things, at the same time, they were coming through North America, and a lot of proof is showing they were going down the Mississippi River. This is a trade route.
That's what it looks like.
And see, history, our history books aren't saying that, but you know what, Harry? Artifacts don't lie, do they?
No, let the rocks speak. And your term, modern history books, I've tried to come up with something better, and it seems you could probably call it Smithsonian history concerning this country and this continent. The Smithsonian history is what is pragmatic about, there was no European contact before Columbus. Columbus. And they would have you think that the ancient people thought the earth was flat. However, I cannot find in any book printed in any language before World War II that anyone ever thought the world was flat. It's your Smithsonian institution taking over, accusing ancient people and even people before in the 1300s, 1400s just being total idiots about the earth being flat. Why couldn't they look at the sun? Oh, that's a ball. That's a round circle. That's a ball. Couldn't they look at the moon and say, oh, wow, that's a ball. That's a round circle. And you can clearly see the moon when it's in its phases that it is a ball. It is a circle. And why wouldn't they just simply deduce, oh, maybe we're a circle too?
Well, according to some of the ancient maps you have, I've seen not only yours, but original copy of the original Magellan map. Obviously, at that time in early 1600s and before, the century before, when they first started with the Latin map, they knew the world wasn't flat.
Yes.
That's what the meridians were all about. That's why Meridian, we have that now named after Meridian, who is the first one to really accurately start to map it out and have a grid system. So, yeah, rewritten history, that's really what I'm talking about. Modern history, it is rewritten for the most part with so many things. I mean, even things about our world wars in the past century. Same thing. It's all rewritten for the victor. Correct. Well, okay, we've got this amazing discovery. Now we've got a guy in the 80s who reads a couple books, got himself a nice metal detector, and apparently stumbles on what was written in both those books from the historical records back in the 30s. So what happened, Harry? What we know that this is, you mentioned him, this is Russell Burroughs. What did he do?
He followed the treasure books, and he got close to the area, and he just happened to be riding by in April of 1982 and saw a lady working in her yard, and he stopped and told her that he worked for a museum in Chicago, and did she know where the Indian pits were? And she had said yes, and so after waiting a little, she actually took him down to the area that was listed in these treasure books. And I want to point out that in Russell Burroughs' first book, Mystery Cave of Many Faces, on page 33, chapter 11, the subtitle is Real Adventure, 1982. And at the bottom of the page it says, it was in April of 1982 that this sequence of events took place. On page 35, chapter number 12, the subtitle is The Discovery of the Cave, 1982. So here he's writing April of 1982, and all through this book, all of his references are April of 1982. And that is when this lady took him down to the site. And he had his little metal detector with him. And he had climbed down underneath one of the sheltered bluffs and said, I think I see hieroglyphs down here. Writing, ancient writing. And his little metal detector was buzzing off, going off, and they spent several minutes there, and he was breaking twigs going in and out and, knocking trees over and little branches pulling them so that he could find his way back to the place more easily.
Like a hunter.
So he evidently went back several days in a row, and at the end of that week, he contacted this lady who first took him down there, and he told her that he thinks he had found a cavern of some sort in towards the north end of the ravine, or one of the ravines. And then she never heard anything more from him until the early 90s when his first book came out. And
so sounds like he really did put the coordinates from the two books together, had this lady help him. And like you said, in the first half hour here, he even sold the lid to the carved out shaft. Just amazing.
I'll just take this one here first. It's the closest one.
Oh, boy. I have a question. You mentioned how Fern Lowry, the original discoverers, actually, it was her who originally discovered this.
Correct.
Did she say that it was the same type of area in this bluff, in a bluff like Burroughs described?
Well, let me go back to her story. When I contacted her, she fully supported the same story that I had heard from Thomas P. Terry. That she explained to me that when Michael Paul Henson had contacted her father, and her father took Michael Paul Henson to the site, that later that evening, Orville Lowry actually called Fern, long distance, down in Texas, and was very happy. He was very happy that someone had found what he had recorded in the WAPA papers and come to visit him and treated this discovery with some significance, and that she fully supported everything that Thomas P. Terry had told me, and these people were generations and miles apart, and the only common denominator was Michael Paul Henson between them and Orville Lowry. So that story being backed up by two different people, the daughter of Orville Lowry and then one of the friends of Michael Paul Henson, it made it more than a chance or coincidence that somebody was telling me the truth. The story had stayed alive in their minds and was supported.
So that's about as accurate as you're going to get. So here we've got this entrance, this shaft that was carved out of stone. Burroughs finds that, and he starts going down in there and starts pulling things out. Eventually, he makes a sketch. I believe he put that in his book of the layout of where the crypts were and things like that. I want to jump real quick. A lot of people are going to say, okay, so it's an Indian burial place. You know, the Indians were all in southern Illinois. And by the way, this area we're speaking about, in case listeners don't know this area, Marion County, we're talking about the southern tip of Illinois, where you have the Ohio River coming down on one side, you have the Mississippi on the other. There's lots of other rivers in between. Southern Illinois is a very unique geographical layout. It's right there with two major rivers meet at the tip of southern Illinois, Mississippi and Ohio. Harry, a lot of people don't know about southern Illinois, and surely don't know about this tomb, the caves, but it's always been talked about, you know, with those who are artifact seekers and such, about all the names that are in southern Illinois, the names of the towns. Now, I had known before I had read your books that there was an area that they called Little Egypt. But give us a little background, and of course this is to me by no mistake, and that's why I'm bringing this up. The names of towns and counties and such, all in that area, and even into Indiana, I believe, where large mounds of ancient civilizations have also been found. What are some of the names?
Well, Little Egypt is generally topographically indicated as being south of Highway 50. And you can start there and work your way down. Salem is a stripped-out version of Jerusalem. There you have like the Cadiz campground, which is from the Spanish port town of Cadiz. Mm-hmm. There is an Alexander Lake. Cairo, or what they call Cairo here, is at the confluence of the Mississippi and Ohio. And all through southern Illinois, there's Macedonia. There's a lot of Greek names, Egyptian names, and no one really has an accurate reason of why. It's pretty much speculation, but it at some point could have been that somebody found some tablets with Egyptian hieroglyphs on them and said, oh, well, you know, if they found them over here, over there, over here, over there, they would have just naturally thought this was Little Egypt. Mm-hmm. So it is quite possible. It's wide open for discussion, and we may never know, but maybe one of these days some people will come forward that have had artifacts as heirlooms for generation after generation. My great-great-great-grandfather found this on his farm. And then when you're talking about coming up the Mississippi and the Ohio, where the Mississippi and the Ohio meet, the Ohio River is like twice as wide as the Mississippi. And all up and down both of these rivers are massive, or the relics, the ruins of many ancient civilizations that were very, very large. As you come up the Ohio, you also pass the Tennessee and the Cumberland River that have massive ancient civilizations all up and down those streams.
Now, we're talking older than Native American Indian, which is what most people think is our ancient civilization. So you're talking about thousands of years instead of hundreds.
Right. And the Wabash River empties into the Ohio. As you go farther up, the White River, the Scioto River, several rivers in Ohio itself, the Monongahela and the Allegheny meet together in Pittsburgh to form the Ohio River. Then you have the Muskingum, several rivers that have just literally hundreds and hundreds of mounds with incredible artifacts, Adena, Hopewell artifacts, all up and down the river stream. And on the Ohio and Illinois, you have a massive mound complex called the Kincaid Mounds, which is a series of several mounds where thousands of people lived. And on the Kentucky side, real close to Cave-in-Rock, in the 1930s, they excavated an ancient town they called Tolu, T-O-L-U, Tolu. And they estimated that there were 35,000 inhabitants at Tolu.
Wow.
As you come up the Mississippi, across from where St. Louis is today, you have the Cahokia Mounds. And they estimated that there were over 25,000 people that lived at the Cahokia Mounds. And let's not forget that St. Louis, where St. Louis is today, that was a huge mound complex.
Wow.
But the French pretty much destroyed it, leveled it out, put their churches and houses and trading posts there.
Yeah, that's what the Spanish did in South and Central America. They turned around and took pyramids and used the local indigenous people and filled all the pyramids over with dirt and put cathedrals on the top.
Yes, and all up and down the Illinois River, there were massive sites. I think it's called the Kemptown or the Kempstone site, where there's still a massive ancient civilization unearthed. And the Mississippi goes up into Wisconsin, where you have probably more effigy mounds than anywhere else, curving on back into Minnesota.
Wow.
So the Mississippi River, and don't forget the Missouri River also empties into the Mississippi River. So does the Arkansas River. And up at the Arkansas River, they have found incredible ancient civilizations. So it's just one after another, and it appears that any of these ancient civilizations who built mounds, worshipped the sun, and used the circle cross, or what today modern Native Americans call the medicine wheel.
Mm-hmm.
It's a circle with an X in it, some way, somehow, that can be associated with this group of people that came here. The circle cross, sun worship, mounds on the river system are all directly and indirectly related to these ancient colonists that came here.
Now the tomb that we're speaking about, the Illinois Caves, so to speak, or Burroughs Caves. I hate to use that name. It really bothers me. I just want you to know that.
I do too. I hate it, but that's what it became known as.
Yeah, so we got to kind of let everybody know what the common thing is. But boy, it really
it's terrible, isn't it? But it hurts.
And,
you almost have to grit your teeth to see Burroughs.
I do. That's why I mentioned it last. Okay, so with these caves that you have done so much historical and exploration with, and finding history and translations with Paul, your associate, who had done a lot of the translation of tablets and some of the stone inscriptions. All right, was this by a river itself? I'm not familiar with the area, so kind of draw us a map. That used to be a creek that come along this area.
The original route. Okay, first of all, it happened about, let's say, between 25 and 30 BC. And that's what some of the dates on the stones say. So, and they're all dated in Roman time. It doesn't say, like, for instance, some fake artifacts will be, this is inscribed in 22 BC. Well, you can't
right.
BC before BC. So they're dated in Roman time, which Roman time begins in 753 BC at the founding of Rome by Romulus.
And you're talking about dates that are on actual artifacts that have come out of this particular cave?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, correct. And there is also another dating system which we don't understand. It's an indexing of some sort, but we'll have to have some other expert examine that to bust that. And so Paul, deciphering these stones, and then coordinating the information he lifted from the stones with classical history, the story became more understandable.
So was this part of waterway system that
Well,
connected with the rivers and such? I mean,
it all began a couple of thousand years ago, and at that time, the topography here, the rivers that exist today were probably much wider. Some of them were probably wider. Some of them may have been smaller. And it wouldn't have been so difficult to get up into the river system at some type of flood stage. Even when the French settlers came here, the beavers, for instance, they had dams everywhere, and they could hold that water back and make huge reservoirs. A beaver dam in the right place will back up could back up hundreds and hundreds of acres. We don't know. But the route that they took was going up the the Mississippi, and then when they got to the confluence of the Mississippi and Ohio, they naturally would have gone to the right, which would have been northeasterly because the Ohio was so much wider than the Mississippi, and then traversed up that to the Wabash River, which is still very large today, and in some places it's not very deep, but at flood stage it is very deep. They would have turned northward up the Wabash, and then they would have come up to the next river on their left, which would have been the Little Wabash, and from the Little Wabash they would have taken another left up the Skillet Fork River, and until the Skillet Fork River came into Marion County. From there, they would have gone up what is called the Lick Branch for maybe 3 or 4 miles tops, maybe 3 miles, 3.5 miles, no more than 4 miles, to get to where this site is. And there are mounds, huge mounds, all the way up and down the Skillet Fork. And there is a series of mounds, large and small, right there along the Lick Branch.
So
Very
we're talking
close to where the Lick Branch and the Skillet Fork meet is a place called Kearns Hill that appears to be an effigy mound 45 feet high that covers 28 acres.
Wow.
So that's twice the size of Monk's Mound that covers 14 acres.
So that's not far from the tomb of Alexander the Great.
No, 2.5, 3 miles, 3.5 miles, something like that.
So there's no doubt this area where the tomb is and the river and the Skillet Fork, I believe you said Skillet something, River Creek Fork.
Skillet Fork, like fork that you eat with, Skillet Fork.
Gotcha. the fork off of the other river, right. All right, so you've already dated back more than 2,000 years, what we would call BC. Wow. So this was, no doubt, this whole area where the tombs are located was a metropolis. That large mound you just described that's a little over 2 miles away, that's not a small mound.
No. And if you cross the Skillet Fork over into Wayne County, just a couple of miles further, or even 1.5 miles further, you come to 2 large mounds called Little Potato Hill and Big Potato Hill, which are clearly mounds right next to the Skillet Fork. Wow. Probably, I would say 4 miles. And then there's another series of mounds along the Paddy Creek, and there are other mounds to the west also of this site.
Well, Harry, we're running out of time. I just want to thank you for agreeing to do this series. And, boy, there's a lot here. So I'm excited about doing all the rest of them, believe me. Thank you, Harry. I really appreciate it. And
thank you. I'm looking forward to the next episode.
Yep. You got your weekends free. We'll get all these cranked out here, all right?
Okay.
All right. Thanks again, Harry. I really appreciate it.
Bye, Michael.
All right. Well, that's Harry Hubbard. And Harry is the one who has done the historical work about what he calls, and rightly so, according to the artifact proof that he has, what's written in stone, literally, that this is, according to the writings, the lost tomb of Alexander the Great. And that also includes the children of Mark Antony and Cleopatra, which, we've all heard about that. Well, they're also there. I know it sounds pretty far-fetched, sounds no way, can't be, but believe me, go to IllinoisCaves.com. IllinoisCaves.com. Start searching around in there, especially look at the images, look at the videos, and you're just going to watch them with your mouth open because artifacts don't lie. Literally, as Harry says, what is written in stone is written in stone. There's a lot of history with this. We're going to cover it for as many one-hour broadcasts as it takes. So join us on the next broadcast. It's going to be interesting. Every week you're going to learn something amazing and fascinating. Join us on the next one, part 2. It's been great. Thanks for letting us sit down with you, and we'll catch you on part 2.
Informed, enlightened, alive and amplified. This is the Living Light Network.
Based on reality of artifacts, of things that are written in older books, of maps that prove what our modern maps seem to miss. So this is going to be a real interesting series without a doubt. Harry is also an author. He's already got one book done that he's kind of revamping. He's working on the second book about all the experiences with the Illinois tomb of Alexander the Great. And there's a lot there. I've read them both. I've had that privilege, so I've gotten a great sneak peek at some really wonderful, intriguing, and pretty much puts your mouth open kind of information. I don't know what else to say. More about it, Harry's got a lot to say. So, Harry, yeah, there's an introduction for you. That go all right?
I just wish you'd keep going. I mean, you sound so good. Keep on. But thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to doing this series. I don't know how many episodes it's going to take, but we'll cover everything you want to cover.
Well, you know, Harry, if we just did your first book, we'd probably be half a year. So I guess since you got 2 books, it just might end up being a year here on Sunday afternoons. Who knows?
Okay, I've got it scripted down, and we'll see how it goes. Politically incorrect artifacts, the stones that the artifacts are carved on. There are so many things that one has to take into consideration before or after they begin to learn what has happened here. Mm-hmm. And I had purchased several books from the early 1990s. I believe one of them was from David Hatcher Childress, that mentioned Burroughs Cave, a fantastic discovery, if it is real. And I had always believed that the ancient Mediterranean/Europeans had come here. I didn't have any basis for it, but I stood on my soapbox and I preached it. My father took me to ancient sites and mounds when I was a child, and I just enjoyed seeing them and seeing these ancient artifacts and these ancient carvings that were just incredible. So I always believed that the ancients from Rome, North Africa, Europe, had come here. And in the books, many of the antiquities books printed in the 1800s, they discuss all kinds of incredible finds, ancient coins, ancient walls, fortifications, palisades, ramparts, various things of that nature all over this country.
Avid book collector, finding, the old books, old history, along with those ancient maps, of course. And, it's hard to find people who read these days, but Harry is like, I've been all my life. I would rather see a book than go look up something on the internet, especially now. So I appreciate his avid desire to constantly read, because that's the same way I am. So I guess that's something we have great in common. He in my book, is the expert regarding the Southern Illinois tomb of what he has been able to show on his site, IllinoisCaves.com, is really, through the artifacts, shows that it is the tomb of Alexander the Great. Go to IllinoisCaves.com, and we're going to make some mentions during our show today. Both Harry and I have different pages on there, but just start off there. Harry has posted videos that he's made in the past. They're all on there as well. You can see the link right there on the home page, IllinoisCaves.com. Just click videos, or you can go click where it says videos, now available online, free of charge. Take your time, go through them. I mean, take your time, because you're going to get an education that the history books, the modern ones, do not want to tell you, and that education will be. Well, welcome to our first of what is going to be a real exciting series talking about the Illinois tomb, Illinois caves, with Harry Hubbard. If you've never heard of Harry Hubbard, you're not alone. A lot of people haven't. Let me tell you about this man, and we're going to discuss what he's discovered. It's over a lot of people's heads simply because they don't want to believe that there's a possibility that ancient civilizations actually lived and had been in North America, where history books tell us is that that's not true. There's no way. Harry Hubbard is a very unique man, and I'm very happy to have gotten to know him a little bit. And over this series, I'm sure I'm going to know him a whole lot more. But in my conversations with him, I just knew that we had to do this series, and he agreed to. He's kind of been laying back for past 10 to 15 years when it comes to his discoveries of what he found in Southern Illinois. But let me tell you, this is a man who is an ancient map collector. I consider him truly an historian, no doubt an explorer. And probably one of his best parts is that he's in. Well, this seems pretty far-fetched, I'm sure, to anybody who's going to listen to this series of, you got to be kidding me, the tomb of Alexander the Great sitting in Southern Illinois. But, there's a lot behind it. It might seem like that's a crazy statement to make, but I'll guarantee any listener, by the time you're done with this series, Harry, they're going to be there with their mouth open, and when they see the pictures, they see the transcriptions of the tablets that you have on your site, IllinoisCaves.com. Go in there to the images. People, it's there for you to see with your own eyes. It's there for you to read. In the videos, you'll have the translations that Harry and his associate Paul Shafranki have done. It's just some amazing stuff. So let's start at the beginning, Harry. There is a place called Hickory Hill, Illinois.
Yes.
Why don't you start from there, and what was found outside of Hickory Hill, Illinois?
Well, if I hadn't been a part of this story, I would probably be the most skeptical of anyone. To say that Alexander the Great is buried in Illinois, it's so far-fetched. It's so far out in left field. And there is a tremendous learning curve in not just history, but ancient languages, the artifacts, and the